2 summers ago, I wrote a memoir about my experience at Brookwood Camps in the 1970s. It was a great way to relive those moments. I thought it would be fun to hear other camp stories. So join me as we go back to the bunks. There is a debate as to who the nicest guy in Hollywood is. Some say it's Tom Hanks, while others say it's Henry Winkler. If you were to ask anyone who attended Brookwood Camps in the 1970s, the unanimous choice would be Alan Zwilly Zwillenberg. I was fortunate enough to speak with Zwilly about his vast camp experience. So everybody, up, up, up. Hey.
Hi, Steve.
Hey, Alan. How's it going?
Good. How you doing?
Alan. Why am I calling you Alan?
I know. I feel like I lost my first name in camp.
That's the first time. Well, you look like you're in an undisclosed location picking color war.
That's right. Yes.
Is that Henry or Nelson's house?
That's Henry's house.
That's
yeah. Right by the road.
A little bit of lore. So I estimated that obviously in 1974 you were my counselor, but I think I attended 2 reunions after that. I don't know if I've seen you since 1996.
Yeah, sometime around then. It's been a long time.
It has been. I mean, it's funny because 96 doesn't sound that far away, but somebody born then is like teetering on 30 years old.
Yeah, that's really
pretty
something.
crazy.
Yeah.
So, obviously we're here to talk about your camp years, and the Cracker Jack research team here, went back to, it sounds like it all started at a camp called Kee Wah.
That's right. Very good. Yeah.
So, how old were you? How did you hear of Kee Wah, your young Zwilly and Roslyn?
Right.
How did that all come to pass?
It turned out that our next door neighbors and people across the street were sending their kids to Kee Wah. We heard about it from them and had a visit from the owner. He came with a book showing pictures of the camp. He talked about it for about 10 minutes and I was hooked and ready to go. This was 1960.
Wow.
When I turned 8 years old that summer.
So 8 years old, were you nervous about when you made the decision to go? Were you nervous about going?
No, I was very excited.
So in 1960, Stan and Marcia are your only siblings?
I also have Janet.
Oh, Janet. Okay. I did not.
Another sister, yes.
Did she attend Brookwood?
She was in Brookwood also.
I don't remember her. She was older, younger?
Younger. She's 4 years younger than me.
So who was around? Stan is born in 1960?
Marcia was born in 1961.
And Stan?
Stan, 1954.
So did Stan go to Kee Wah with you?
He went to Kee Wah for three summers. I went for 4 summers. He came the next summer after my first summer in 1961.
So that first year, 8-year-old Alan Zwilly gets on the bus by himself. Was there a bus or a car? How did you?
Actually, we left from Grand Central Station.
Wow.
And at that time, when I saw Grand Central Station, it was like the biggest building in the world. So it was so big there. We took a train to someplace near Kee Wah, and then we took a bus from there.
So were you accompanied on the bus by your parents, or?
And my parents took me to Grand Central Station, and then they had the people from Kee Wah took us onto the train. And that's where I met my first counselor, who was at that moment gave me the nickname Zwilly. That's when it all started.
Oh, wow. It goes back that far. That's amazing. So what's that like? That's the first time leaving home. You're 8 years old. Grand Central is overwhelming. And then you're met with strangers, basically, who are now was that an 8-week ordeal at Kee Wah?
8 weeks, just like Brookwood, yeah.
So now you're about to get onto a train to get to a strange place with strangers. Like, what's going through your head during that time?
Well, this counselor of mine who gave me the nickname Willie, he was on the train. He sat with me and a few other kids, and he was just very good. He got us all feeling good about it, and I felt I was ready to go at that moment. I even remember, I think the first full day of camp, we had softball, and I hit 2 home runs. I still remember it. I had 6 RBIs because I remember I wrote a postcard about it. And things like that just got me right into the swing of things. And I even remember the first week of camp, I won the camp of the week. Never happened after that.
That's no.
I felt like I was really in there and I just loved it from that moment on.
Wow. So, and how many, you said how many years were actually spent there? 4?
4 years.
4 summers. And did you stop going because, was that the camp was closed down at that point, or?
Yeah, the owners were getting on in age and they sold it. And I remember one interesting thing when they sold the camp, they didn't want it to be the same as before. They sold it to a Jewish organization, Camp Ramah. So it would be a different camp. So at that point, many of the people from Kee Wah, including Perry Sandler, came over to Brookwood.
Oh, wow. So who were the notables that made the transition? So there was Perry, yourself. What was Perry at Kee Wah?
Perry was a group leader at Kee Wah.
Was he your group leader?
No, he was, in Kee Wah was a little different. The group leaders stayed in the same age group every summer. So my last summer there, I turned 11. And actually I turned 12. And Perry was going to be my group leader the next summer, but then the camp was sold. So it turned out that Perry ended up at Brookwood becoming my group leader in 1966.
He saw young Zwilly hit with those 6 RBIs. He said, "We got to recruit this kid."
Even though I never lived up to that promise.
Peaked early.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. So, and who were there others that made the transition? Other notables?
Bob Feinglass was the boys' camp head counselor at Brookwood. He came over to Kee Wah. And actually, there was a guy, Steve Pergozzi, who was my first group leader at Brookwood. He was I think he was the waiter counselor at Kee Wah. And also a number of campers came over.
So when you get to Brookwood, same thing. So now the trip up to the very first trip up to Brookwood, was that the bus system was in use at that point?
Yeah, we were using the bus.
And how was that? Like you've got some familiar faces that are going, but I'm assuming at that point Brookwood was fairly established, but you're going to be, once again, starting from scratch, although and Perry was your group leader at Brookwood? Or?
No, 2 years later, he became my group leader.
Okay. So basically starting over with strangers for all intent and purposes, correct?
Yes, even though there were a number of people from Kee Wah.
So how
from what I understand, I think Brookwood's enrollment went down a little bit. So Kee Wah pumped a lot of new blood into the camp.
So, and in terms of like that whole feeling, were you pining for Kee Wah on the ride up to Brookwood? Because now you were 4 years in, you were a seasoned veteran, and now you're starting somewhere as the new guy again.
There was definitely some uncertainty. And I do remember at the beginning, there was a lot of, I wouldn't call it animosity, but there was a bit of a rivalry between the veteran Brookwood people and the Kee Wah people.
Nice. Picked last for games and that kind of.
Yeah, I even remember in my group, all the kids who were there from Brookwood the year before were talking about who's going to be on the softball team for the group. I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to be second base no matter what they say.
And were you?
I was. Actually, I was started out at second base, but then my counselor, Harvey Yaverbaum, decided to put me at third base. So I played third base, and that became my favorite position the rest of my softball time.
And you established, and then when did the rivalry start to dissipate and everything blend?
I felt by the end of the year, it dissipated, and some of the kids from Brookwood became my best friends. After about a year or so, there wasn't much of a rivalry anymore.
Any of the people that were established at Brookwood that made it through the 70s that we may know?
Yeah, I don't know if you remember my friend Mark Abrodsky.
Yeah, sure, Abo, yeah.
In Abo. Yeah, he stayed on to Brookwood. He became a counselor. Unfortunately, he passed away.
I had heard.
2019.
Terrible.
Yeah. And from Kee Wah, you remember Harley Green?
Of course, my first counselor. Yeah,
that's right. Yes, he became my friend my first year in Kee Wah. We have been friends ever since then.
Oh, so he similar trajectory from Kee Wah to Brookwood.
Also, yes.
Wow, that's
Right.
incredible. Those guys go back a long way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you get into Brookwood. What were the real immediate points of differentiation where you said, we're not in Kansas anymore. This is something completely different. Like, what were the very distinct variables between the two camps? What was similar? What was really different? And maybe an adjustment for you?
Yeah, I found it pretty similar. Also, they brought Tribor over from Kee Wah to Brookwood. We did not have color at Kee Wah because I think from what I heard, it became a little too violent at Kee Wah.
Wow.
So they changed it over. Harry would probably know this better. They changed it over to have Tribor. So they brought Tribor over to Brookwood. And I was hearing things about color war, and I was actually a little bit nervous about how it's going to be because I heard how intense it was.
Right.
And so when color war started, it was, I don't know if you remember, it was kind of strict. We were not allowed to talk in the dining room, and we were marching all the time. And I think we actually had to put the little rubbers over our shoes in the morning. I remember some crazy things like that.
For the dew in the grass, you weren't allowed to have wet feet. And so when you switched over to Brookwood, what group were you in? How many years of camper were you?
I was in the plebes in 1964, bunk 10. And I was a camper for 4 years at Brookwood, ending up in the den in 1967 as a senior. And then after that, I became a waiter for 2 summers.
Is this pre-Varsity Hall?
Yeah, there was no Varsity Hall yet.
Wow. I
don't remember what that building was used for. I think some staff people may have slept there. But the den was the oldest kids were in the den.
Sure. And was there a Jackson at that point?
No Jackson.
Wow. So that's really...
I think the next summer in 68, they started Jackson.
It's as Jackson did not seem that new when I was there.
It was old, yeah. Old.
In 73, yeah.
Right.
So you held those roles. Was it at that point, did you, the aspiration, I think, of campers is, the waiter seems like a really cool next step. I feel like everybody aspires to be a waiter. Was it everything you had hoped for?
Yeah, actually, it was really good. The work was sometimes hard in the kitchen, and, you had to get the food out as soon as possible, and there were long lines waiting to get the food.
How old were the kids that you were waiting on the first?
The first summer I had girls, I think about 12 years old. And they were pretty easy to wait on because they didn't eat so much.
Now, was this the Katimsky and Tuckman years? Were they the ownership at that point?
Katimsky and Tuckman owned Brookwood.
And who was the director at that point?
At that time, it was Bob Feinglass, who came over from Kee Wah. He was director until 1968. And then my second year as a waiter, 1969, Perry had become director.
So that's interesting. So whoever was the director pre the Kee Wah transition was no longer, and then they appointed somebody from Kee Wah into it.
Right.
Bob
Feinglass. Yeah. I had heard about the pre-director. I think his name was Shelley Rathman. But he definitely wasn't there, but people would talk about him. But he was no longer at the camp.
And in terms of, the going from waiter, so you did 2 years as a waiter?
Yes.
And then obviously the next aspiration of every camper, as every camper lives for Camper Counselor Day, when you get to be a counselor for a day. And here's an opportunity to be a counselor in actuality. So what was that like?
That was actually a little scary for me. I knew camp very well from being a camper and a waiter. But in terms of having to take care of kids, I had absolutely no clue what to do. And a funny story, you'll remember the 2 people in this story. Stewie Perlin.
Sure.
Unfortunately, had also
I had heard. It's crazy.
And Richie Miller were friends from home. So I was there. I knew I was going to be the counselor, and I knew who Stewie Perlin was because he had been in camp before. So I saw him get off the bus. So I went to approach him to try to bring him over to the bunk. And Richie Miller came off the bus right behind him, carrying some kind of it looked like almost a cardboard suitcase. So they came off the bus, and I approached them. And Stewie Perlin turned to Richie Miller, and he pushed him and knocked him down. And the suitcase opened up, and all the comic books fell out of the suitcase. And Stewie said, "This is my friend Malilla." And they started to fight. And I had to separate them. And I thought to myself, what did I get myself into?
That story tracks. I could totally see that happening.
Yes.
And, so that's an interesting way to kind of segue into that. So in terms of like the counselors that you had, was there anybody who said, oh, I'm going to pattern this experience of counselor after this person? This is somebody I want to really draw from. Or did you go into it just like, hey, let's see what we have here?
Kind of let's see what happens. I was very lucky that Richie Kamen was the group leader, and I was lucky to work under him because he made it very easy to adjust to it and everything. And his way, he was not strict at all, but he had a way of certain charisma with the kids, and it was just very easy to work as a counselor under him.
What's crazy to me looking back on it now, is, how old were you when you were a counselor for that first year?
I turned 18 that summer.
Which is insane. You're, children watching children. But
Right.
Perry and Richie, arguably, 30s and 20s in those,
Right.
everybody was really young. But, as a young camper looking at everybody just seemed so, you guys, these were adults, but in actuality, really weren't. These are all really young guys and women, watching over everyone.
Right. It was just sometimes, you're supposed to be the mature one, but you, at 17 or 8 years old, you sometimes have moments when you get very angry yourself and have to really control yourself.
So in terms of it brings up a good one. If you could go back and relive any single day in any single role that you had at Brookwood, is there a day that sticks out like, I wish I had that day back? Whether it was to do something different or it was such a good day that I would just want to live it again.
I think the most memorable thing, it's going to sound very funny, was being a color war general. Especially for somebody like me, I was generally very quiet, and became a color war general, and it was just a great experience.
Was that the Blue Bulgars?
Yes, very good.
Cracker Jack, told you, Cracker Jack research team.
Yes. And then actually 6 years later, I had the Gold Nebulons. I had a second chance to be a general.
Wow, you were a two in a row?
No, this was 6 years apart.
Oh, 6 years apart. Sorry.
Yeah.
So let's go back to that. So you're a counselor at age 18. How many years do you stay a counselor at Brookwood?
I was a counselor for 5 summers.
For 5 summers. And what were the years? Those were
1970 to 1974.
70 to 74. So I came to camp in 71. So that was your second year.
Right.
Were you were bunk 9? My second, when I was in 8, you were in 9 or 10?
I was in bunk 10. I think you were in bunk 8.
I was 8, you were 10. And then I went to, what was it? Was I in 14?
You were in 14.
And you were 16?
Yes.
And then Jackson. And then you were my actual counselor in Varsity Hall, though.
Yes,
where
right.
You were in the annex of the room that Richie Malilla.
Exactly.
Right. So it all comes full circle. It all kind of works. So then I leave in 74. I was there for a few days in 75. You're still there in 75.
No, 75 I didn't go back in 75 because I had already graduated college and I was working full time. So I wasn't there in 1975. And that was very tough for me.
I was just going to ask, that had to have been.
That was really tough to be out of camp. I did go up a few times to bring my sister there. And also Perry was nice enough to let me stay for a week during the summer.
Oh, what?
Which, I was always grateful to him for that. It was very tough not being in camp that summer.
So, but how did you came back to be a group leader later on?
Very
So,
interesting story. I came back in 1976. I didn't go to camp. I had been in Israel for the first half of the year. I worked at a kibbutz. And then I came back and I had tickets to the Olympics in Montreal. It was a once in a
wow.
life type of thing. So I wasn't at camp, although I did go up to visit a few times. And then in August, early August, I got a phone call from Perry at 8:30 in the morning. He said, I had to fire a group leader last night. Are you interested in coming up? So I didn't even think twice. I said, yep, okay. And I think I was there by 2:00 in the afternoon, and I was group leader the rest of that summer. And the next summer, I had the same kids.
That's incredible. So I want to back it up. So you graduated American University,
Yes.
and
Yes.
that told you great stuff. First summer, you are not there. The summer rolls around. Like what did that feel like? I mean, you are now entrenched in camp culture, and this is the day the buses are going, and you can just picture those kids getting off the bus. Like what did that feel like for you?
And it was tough. I brought my sister up to camp, and I had to leave eventually, and it was very tough to leave there.
And in terms of being a group leader, what groups were you the group leader over?
I had the plebes in 1976. This was bunks, I think, 3 and 4. And then 1977, the same kids with the Rangers. It was bunks 7, 8, and 9.
So how was that? I mean, you go from counselor of older kids, then going back to be a group leader. I mean, 3 and 4, those are really young kids. So
yeah, I was a little worried that they wouldn't be able to play the sports, but they actually were pretty good. One thing I decided to do for sure in 77, when I had them for a year, they had basketball scheduled at the junior volleyball courts with a small hoop. And I asked if I can have them have the basketball in the concrete area, because I thought that would be better for them. Even if they would struggle to reach the rim, I thought that would be better. And it turned out to be good.
that's so. And then so the next year, was it the same kids, or did you skip a group?
It was in 76 and 77, the same kids.
So same kids. So you're a constant for them. Now, did your last time at Brookwood, you were group leader for the second or third year? That was your third year as a group leader?
The second year. And then another interesting story from 1978. I didn't think I was going to be available to go to camp, so I never signed up for it. And then in June, things worked out that I would be available. So I called Perry, and unfortunately, all the group leader spots were taken. So I didn't go. And in July, I was missing it.
Mm-hmm.
So I finally had enough. I went up to camp for visiting day in the end of July, and I waited until all the parents left, and I approached Perry, and I said, Perry, can I stay the rest of the summer? So he said, okay, I can work something out for you. So I stayed as a counselor in Varsity Hall. Talk about full circle.
Wow. So this was what year? This was
1978.
78. Okay.
Yeah.
And going back to, I know I'm jumping way back, when you were in waiter bunks, was Harry the Beard?
Harry the Beard was there.
So that's my dad's childhood friend was Harry the Beard. So when I got to camp, I had my sister there and 2 cousins, as you well know. My first year, they were both there. Harry was the only other, I wouldn't say familiar, but obviously knew that he was my dad's childhood friend. So I know he would once in a while come around during softball and, check up on me and make sure everything was fine that first year. But yeah, it's a pretty wild experience, like going through that, as a camper for the first time, and those few familiar faces really become, meaningful and impactful. So, in anything like to this day that reminds you of those days, whether it's a song, a smell, a sound that just takes you right back to those camp days?
Um, just picturing the whole scene of how the camp looked and everything. One thing I always think about is the view from boys' camp looking down to the lake. That's something that stays in my mind all the time.
It was a beautiful, I mean, the grounds were really beautiful. I don't know at the time as a, timid 10-year-old, I realized it, but, years later, it's like, it was really a beautiful landscape.
Yes.
Pretty incredible. And now Laconda's still in existence, correct? To the best of my knowledge.
Yes, good.
So, and then lots of movies are made about summer camps. There's a lot of good ones out there, Wet Hot American Summer and Stripes. If there was a camp movie about Brookwood, who plays you during your counselor years?
That's a tough one. I think I'll have to wait a little bit to think about it a little bit.
It would be an interesting casting. Sometimes, you think about, you see traits in somebody, you're like, oh, that person would be great to play so-and-so. So, we both pride ourselves on pretty good long-term memories, but I definitely bow to the master in anything that is Brookwood. But I'm going to throw a few nicknames at you of people, and I want you to give me their real name. And I'll go from easy and it'll get a little bit tougher. I think I have about 6 or 7 names here. Okay. Number 1 is Poncho.
Jerry Giraldo.
Jerry Giraldo. Number 2, I think is going to be a layup for you, is Biz.
His name was Wayne Linksman, something like that.
Was it Wayne Landsman?
Not Wayne Landsman.
Wayne Linksman?
Linksman, yes.
I just he was in Bunk 10 with you.
He was my co-counselor in Bunk 16.
Oh, that's right. It was Bunk 16. Yeah. You guys were together. Okay, ready? Debo.
Jeff Bernstein.
Very good. Now they get a little tougher. We've got through the dancing whammy.
Don't have this one.
Do you remember? There was a camper that I think he was in the group older than us. And if I'm not mistaken, Bernie Whites gave him
Mark Hostridge.
Very good. Wow. You just needed
a few. He also called him, I shouldn't say this, he called him
there were so many, there were so many things that would have gotten that camp, any camp, I guess, canceled. I mean, I don't even know if Tri-Boar could happen any longer, but you start thinking back of the craziness. But yeah, I remember Mark Hostridge was asked to do the whammy when the Harlem Wizards was there, and he panicked. Yeah. Okay, another tough one coming up in the same vein as the dancing whammy, the Weasel. Not Pauly Shore, the Brookwood Camps version of Weasel.
Richard Weber?
Wow. How did you... I am incredibly impressed. I thought that one would take a bit. And the last one is Stinky.
Stinky, his name, Lerman, Joe Lerman.
Oh my... I bow to the master. That's incredible. Wow. That's impressive. I have to give you that. So anything that we didn't discuss that you think is important to reminisce about or, was really defining for you during those years?
I think probably the toughest thing I think as a counselor to deal with was the bullying, I remember. That was kind of unavoidable sometimes because some of the kids were a little bit weaker in terms of asserting themselves, and it was the one regret I have sometimes is that I didn't handle it as well as I should have.
See, I think you handled it really well. I learned, I guess, much later on, like you were really in tune to some of the kids' backstories, the kids who had, like as campers, you don't know the backstories of some of your bunkmates or group mates. what they're going through personally, whether it's broken homes or, in the midst of a home breaking. But I feel like you were always in tune and kept a keen eye out for those kids. And I remember, I mean, I was a middle of the road guy. I wasn't, there were popular kids. There were, I put myself in the middle of the road, but there were times when, like any kid that age, you do things that you regret later on in life. But I remember, and we won't name names, I was getting under a bigger kid's skin, and you looked at the bigger kid, you're like, look at him, he's small and skinny, just kick his ass. So you told him to take care of me. But, and looking back on it, it was like, yeah, that's great advice. The kids should have. That probably would have ended it right then and there, but at that age, look, you have, before the real world was on MTV, there was summer camp. You take a group of very different 10, 11, 12, 13-year-olds and put them in a bunk for 8 weeks. Things are going to happen. Let's face it.
Yes.
But I have to say, in the years there, short of a few incidents, that, it could have been a lot worse. And I would imagine in today's modern day camp, it's way magnified to what we saw or experienced.
Yes, I was speaking to Richie Kamen recently, and he told me that at his camp, Equinox, the kids, the way he put it, much softer than they were back in our time. I guess they're just not as tough as they used to be.
Wow, it's like the modern day NBA.
Yes, exactly.
So I mean, I want, that's a whole nother conversation, I think, just about, I can't imagine you pull devices out of kids' hands and put them into a bunk for now camps. I mean, camps go what, max 6 weeks? It's, that
7 weeks. Yes.
That's the definition of soft right there. Go 8 weeks, like go right until Labor Day, that's it. But, these camps, I know my older one went to camp and it's like 4 weeks. It's like, this should be visiting day, not your go home day,
Yeah.
So, what were the treats, the snacks, the care package? What was the item that you just couldn't wait to rip into as a camper?
I think when you used to get salami sandwiches, it was a big thing.
Yeah. I remember anything that was patterned after real food, whether it was like chicken in a biscuit or bacon flavored chips, that was like gold. And Coca-Cola was, you had to hide that because that was the one thing that everybody wanted, the Coke cans.
People used to put cans of soda in the toilet tank.
Yeah, I actually wrote about that in that memoir I put out. That was how we kept it cold in the toilets. It was funny. Before we got on the phone, I was thinking, you get the flashbacks in your mind. Do you remember the year the Brooklyn bus broke down? So Peter Cohn's dad put me, him, and Paul Schechner into a limo, which was, of course, my first limo ride at age 13, 12. I think I was 12 going on 13 that summer because I was in Jackson. And I remember pulling in through the gates and you were one of the first people we saw. And we rolled down the window because you were probably like, who the hell is arriving by stretch limo? And you ran after us, through pretty much down the entire road. So that was a really great memory for me of, being in a limo at age 12, first of all, going, 2.5, 3 hours to Glens Bay. That was a pretty incredible and once in a lifetime experience. Anything for you that stands out that, the overriding experience or one of the things that kind of zigged when you were supposed to zag that didn't happen exactly as planned? Any memory?
Let me think. I can't think of any type of regrets now.
Anything that was a snafu? And
I guess one thing that I do regret, I never made the counselor basketball team.
So, that's actually leads me to a good one. If you were to take the ultimate starting five by position from the years you were there, if you were to say, at the guards would be, the forwards would be, and the center would be, who would be the all-time starting five?
Well, first of all, the all-time player, I think, at Brookwood was Jay Rahaftig.
All right. That was before my time? Or
before your time, yeah. He actually had a tryout with the New York Nets.
Wow.
And otherwise, I have to put Cliff Nass on the team.
At the three, at the shoot, or was he a small forward?
He would probably be, I think he would be a guard, probably.
So at the two? We'll put him at the two, the shooting guard.
And Donnie Fishman as a small forward.
Okay, at the three.
And maybe Larry Pizer as another forward. And
at the two.
Somebody before your time, there was Bruce Kaplan, who was he was drafted by the Knicks.
Wow.
He would probably be the center.
And you got your point guard.
Joe Hafty.
Okay, so wait, so you have Jay, Cliff, Donnie, Pizer, and then
Bruce Kaplan.
Okay, so yeah, and then any notables that you feel would make who would you have on the bench as backup?
Definitely Bernie White's for sure, and Phil Reitman.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would, and also, how could I forget two other guys I forgot completely about? Dave Gershon and Mike Hipsher.
Okay, those were like Mount Rushmore.
Mike Hipsher couldn't shoot at all, but he did everything. Played defense, rebound, ball handling.
So the prototypical role player. Wow. Those guys, I think my first or second year was probably when they wound down. And there was a lot of transitions between Damaqua and a lot of those guys. I forget what other camps, but I feel like there was a lot of give and take. Like I know Richie came in, did the Damaqua thing. A few people did some Laconda and Brookwood. There was a couple of scenarios, but Mike Hipsher
was at Damaqua and Gary Green also.
So all like Mount Rushmore kind of Brookwood guys my first year. Like they were, those were like the grown-up group leaders in the early 70s.
Yeah, the group leaders were quite good in those years.
Alan, Zwilly, I can't thank you enough for doing this with me. This has been really fun to kind of go down memory lane a bit.
It was fun for me also and great to talk to you. Sorry I couldn't think of the actor to play me, but I just can't come up with anybody.
I've got two in mind. Two very different types, depending on which one you want to go with here.
Okay.
You ready?
Ready.
I could go with Miles Teller. Familiar with Miles Teller? He was in the new Top Gun Maverick movie. Okay, and he's done a lot of work. And Michael Cera has that kind of nice, soft-spoken, plays those roles. But somewhere, one of those two guys I could see playing the counselor, you possibly in different years of your tenure.
Interesting.
All right, Zwilly, this has been a treat for me.
Same here.
Hopefully, you got everything out there that wanted to, and we'll definitely catch up soon.
Definitely. Great talking to you.
Same here. All right. Have a good one.
Okay, thanks. You too.
Speak later.